Mr. Adam Weinstein. On behalf of Islamabad Policy Research Institute, I welcome you all to this webinar titled India-Pakistan Standoff 2025. Before commencing this session, I would request the audience to please mute your devices so that we may begin. Okay. Thank you. Now we will proceed with the welcome remarks by President IPRI, Lieutenant General retired Majid Ehsan. Lieutenant General retired Majid Ehsan is a retired three-star general of the Pakistan Army with over 35 years of distinguished service, having varied command, staff, and instructional experiences. As a Lieutenant General, he has been President National Defense University and Commander 4 Corps Lahore. He holds multiple advanced degrees in defense and strategic studies from Pakistan and Egypt. I would request Lieutenant General retired Majid Ehsan to please deliver his welcome remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman rahim. Very good morning to Mr. Adam Weinstein. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are really uh, very happy to be around you, and we are sure that your participation would be of a great encouragement and of a great knowledge for the entire staff and of IPRI and all those who have joined this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this webinar was to briefly discuss about the genesis of this deadly and consequential armed conflict between India and Pakistan, its immediate, short, and long-term effects on geopolitics and security framework of the entire globe, especially on the environment of South Asia, and see where it might lead to from here. We have our distinguished speakers here in the shape of Ambassador Asif Durrani and Brigadier Rashid Ali Zanjua, and I'm sure we'll be greatly enlightened by their views. I'll just share a little bit of my perspective on it because the post-Pahalgam environment brought the entire world literally at the brink of a global cataclysm. Emerging from the hubris and perversity of a rogue Hindutva-driven mindset of RSS, Indian leadership had set this entire stage not only to degrade militarily and economically Pakistan, but to reduce it to a status of compliant state. They also aimed at speeding up the cleansing of illegally occupied Indian Jammu and Kashmir of indigenous Muslims population from here and change the democracy. This was all pelted up with the fictionally triggered and charged up state-controlled media of India, who were already exaggerating everything happening right up from 23rd April 2025. But what happened subsequently on the nights of 6th, 7th May and in the morning of 10th May was a nightmare for India. The way we responded was not only a great source of encouragement for the entire nation, but I think it went very well and it encouraged all the neighboring countries of India in the South Asian region. It was also an eye opener for the rest of the world, and because they were under a great Indian spell of their emerging global power image and their soft image. This Operation Rahe-Haq and Bunyan Mursus carried great lessons for military historians, technical war experts, and especially the intelligentsia of the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, where we go from here, in my view, we might continue to live on the edge of a deadly war or at best under the environment of an uneasy peace for the time being. We might also take some time to address and overcome our own shortcomings and weaknesses and emerge out of this conflict as a very strong nation. However, what this conflict has proved is that India has lost what it fooled the entire world for the last so many years. Its self image, its radiations of a reliable country and a responsible nuclear state, they have all gone in thin air. This craze of setting new norms has exposed India's blatant attitude of insulting and defying already respected, morally sound, legal, and based on global justice norms uh, in a total disregard. So just imagine, in order to set new norms, the way they are treating the established norms, especially in regards to Indus Water Treaty, they are aiming at starving the entire nation of 250 million people. So now, with this short premise, I'll request Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua to please share your views with us. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
Hadia.
so much, sir.
Go forward. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, General Majid, Mr. Weinstein, Ambassador Durrani, and distinguished audience. Very warm welcome on this Islamabad Policy Research Institute's uh, webinar on a very, very important topic. And this is a topic that has touched each one of us's lives, our survival instincts, and it has created a kind of a environment in which the whole nation, it has been galvanized into a single entity, a single organism that thinks, that talks, and that reflects the mood of the entire country. This 72 hours standoff between two nuclear neighbors, this brought our civil and military responses at a very, very high pitch. And I say this civil and military both because this is a war which was fought in the glare of cameras, as all wars of this modern era are fought. And some say it is a two skirmish standoff, but I would consider this as a foretaste of things to come. And it's a veritable trailer of the modern wars. And in many ways, it's a microcosm of whatever is happening on technology front, whatever is happening on diplomacy front, and whatever is happening on interstate front. And the larger scheme of an anarchic world in which the multilateralism is on the retreat, and the tendency and the proclivity of the global powers and the original surrogates and gendarmes to take things into their own hand and ride roughshod over international law norms. This was also showcased. Now, I'll be very quick because we would basically want Mr. Weinstein to speak more, and then we can go for a question answer session. So I'll make few quick pointers. So my first point is about causes and the fundamental impulse. When we talk of the conflicts, the first question that arises is that what was the fundamental cause and what was the impulse? Now, this fundamental cause or the impulse, if I can lay my finger on one aspect, is that is the hubris, and that hubris is begotten out of a right-wing, religious, uh, ideologically driven sentiment. In India, there's a party, Bharatiya Janata Party, which is driven by RSS ideology, in which hate of the minorities internally and hate of countries like Pakistan, where mostly the Muslim population resides, is externalized. So it's a externalized phenomena of the internal hate that propels an irrational act. Now, why I say this irrational act? Because in nuclear neighborhood, when the deterrence holds and there is no serious casus belli, then resort to this violence is fraught with the risks of a uncontrolled nuclear escalation. Now, having pointed out that hubris, I would like to go first as to how that casus belli was manufactured. So this casus belli was manufactured again from a desire to annex illegally an entity that was on the statute book of UN Security Council resolutions as an international dispute. I'm referring to the illegally occupied state of Jammu and Kashmir, where the Indian occupation forces and the Indian government has annexed and converted it into two union territories. And the whole effort is to change their political identity and their demographics and to ensure that the whole world gets accustomed to this new normal of Indian occupation and Indian annexation of the state of Kashmir. So tourism and an economy on the upswing was used as a pretext to give a Potemkin reality that everything is normal, and this normality was in fact used to as a metaphor to display to the rest of the world that everything is now back to the normal. And the poor unsuspecting tourists, I think they were an unwitting and unsuspecting victims of this kind of thinking. Another aspect I would like to highlight here is that there is a government in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir led by Chief Minister Omar Abdullah, but the real powers lie with the Lieutenant Governor and the central government and its uh, Minister Interior Amit Shah. And it was Amit Shah who ensured that the whole lever of CRPF, police, and administrative apparatus was with the center. And now there are evidences that are slowly emerging. In times to come, it will gain more traction. That it was, in fact, Amit Shah that had ordered removal of the police checkposts and added layers of security in Pahalgam. Now, Pahalgam was incident which appeared to have been orchestrated because of those violent actors and those disturbed stratums of political thought which do not see eye to eye with the Indian occupation, which whose sentiment was ready to erupt at any moment. So I think they chose this moment, and the Indian government was an accomplice in creating those conditions because they had a plan. Now, what is that plan? So with this, we come to India's political aim. What did it actually want? So Indians probably thought that their role as the regional gendarmerie had invested them with a kind of an immunity to international pressure. They had seen the Gaza, they had seen Ukraine war, and they probably thought that they can get away with the international law violation. And this was the most propitious time. And they went on that pretext and created a new normal that any terrorist incident that takes place inside either in Indian mainland on the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, India will go and attack Pakistan. This was akin to as if in Pakistan's Balochistan, the Jafar Express is attacked, the terrorists take hostages, and we declare war on India. So ludicrous propensity, but this was what actually was very, very carefully orchestrated and choreographed. And to me, the objectives were to involve Pakistan in a conventional conflict in order to weaken it and force it to seek mediation of international powers from a position of weakness, and then on that negotiating table to extract those concessions that India wanted out of Pakistan. That was the overall political aim, and out of that emanated the military aim. And I am quite concerned about the military planners of India because they were at the wrong end of the stick. They were given some impossible military aims. Go and initiate a war against a nuclear country and ensure that it does not spiral into something that is nuclear escalation. Now, there were murmurs of discontent. The Indian armed forces, they initially demurred, Deputy Chief of Air Staff showed its concerns. The Northern Commander came up with his concerns, but he was ridden roughshod by the political juggernaut of Modi's Gang of Four, that is Amit Shah, the Interior Minister, Mr. Jai Shankar, the Foreign Minister, Rajnath Singh, the Defense Minister, and Ajit Doval as the National Security Advisor. So these are the Gang of Four, which are the bedrock of India's ideological underpinnings and which support BJP. Now, having tasked their military with this impossible aim, the military initially began hesitatingly, and as if on a cue, a whole chorus of media frenzy was built up, and the media frenzy was ratcheted up in a manner that is war drums started beating, and it was as if India is celebrating war. And the instinct was atavistic, nihilistic, and revanchist. It appeared as if we are living in a medieval era of Ramayana and Mahabharata. Pakistan's military and political aim was very simple. The political aim given to Pakistan's armed forces was to defend the territory and to ensure that the conventional war space that is sought by India is not given to them. So, from there sprung careful, responsible, cautious, but a very, very effective response of Pakistan Armed Forces and its diplomatic community. We know that the cause, there may not be many takers of Pakistan's point of view in the international community, but it is for the first time that not a shred of evidence was found. And amongst all those wars that we have fought with India, this is the only war in which India was completely isolated and there were no takers for their point of view, because there was not a single shred of evidence linking incident of Pahalgam with Pakistan. And the former governors of Jammu and Kashmir, illegally occupied state, Mr. Satya Paul Malik, he clearly stated that Pulwama was also orchestrated by the Indian defense establishment. And it was a big security lapse which was not investigated. Perhaps some political objectives were to be secured. And then we know what India is doing in Balochistan and in our KP province. The book by Avinash, My Enemy's Enemy, it clearly exposes that nexus. Now, out of this nebulous war aim regarding Indian military's attempts to seek a conventional space emanated a very strange response. On night 6-7 May, in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and the laws of war, the BrahMos missiles were launched against the civilian targets, the places of worship, madrasas, which resulted in civilian killings. That was a very, very provocative act. And in fact, that was an act which had, completely destabilized the carefully and sedulously cultivated nuclear deterrence over a period of time. So Pakistan and its armed forces, they remained within their self-defense role under Article 51 of UN Charter, did not respond aggressively, stayed in their territory and purely in self-defense, scrambled their air force, and through a better orchestration and use of their military instrument, which had been honed to a T over a period of time, because Pakistan thought it will fight outnumbered. Whenever it came to a tango with India, Pakistan's networked force, it fought like a well-oiled machine, and staying in their territory with BVR range weapons, J-10Cs, satellites, and all that technology. Now everybody has discussed those points. Indians' much wanted Rafales were shot down. So that brought about a sobering realization amongst the military planners. But the political masters, they were still in denial. And on 9th May, again, a grave provocation by way of sending the Harop drones which are in fact the loitering munitions, which if countered through the signal jamming and our soft kills, could go haywire and deliver their payload on the civilian targets. Now, that thing
Thank you,
was
sir. You have
also
2 minutes
okay.
remaining.
Thanks. So I'll wind up in those 2 minutes. So that was again a very, very grave act of provocation. It was followed up by BrahMos cruise missile attacks against 5 Pakistani air bases. One of those was right next to the capital, the Noor Khan base. Now, since the Rubicon was crossed, Pakistan had to respond effectively to restore that destabilized nuclear deterrence. The response came on 10th May. It was a massive and relentless barrage of our rocket guided rockets, artillery, our Air Force, and our very effective artillery response on line of control, which targeted essentially their military targets. 26 military targets were chosen. Now, the difference is, while India attacked civilians, we went for their military targets, and the targets were precise, effects were devastating, and that brought about a panic amongst the Indian defense and civilian establishment. And the standoffish and nonchalant attitude of the global powers, which had lain a little unconcerned for the first 48 hours, it sprung into action, and then the international mediation resulted in a ceasefire. Now, what is the impact? Impact is that India lies with its reputation bruised and battered. Pakistan armed forces and the civilian component have gelled together. The entire nation has come together. Pakistan stands taller in the Committee of Nations as a responsible nuclear state. The detractors like Christine Fair, they have also acknowledged Pakistan has rehyphenated India-Pakistan equation, and Kashmir has been identified again as an international dispute. So these are the gains, but there are the inherent risks, and we have to keep our powder dry till the time negative peace prevails, which means we do not solve the fundamental problem, which is the wellspring, and that is the disputed issue of Kashmir, plus the fundamental thinking from which it springs, the Indian hubris and its anti-Muslim revanchist attitude. Unless that is modified, and the Indian civilian planners, they do not see the light of reason and peace, that if they disturb the nuclear deterrence again, who knows who can control the escalatory ladder during a quest for escalation dominance. Anything can go wrong. So we owe it to 1/3 of humanity living in subcontinent to play the part both as responsible protagonists in this nuclear equation, and international community also has a role to play here. So I'll stop here and let the next speakers.
Well, thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Up to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that discourse. We will now move on to hear from our honorable guest, Mr. Adam Weinstein. Mr. Weinstein is Deputy Director of the Middle East Program at the Quincy Institute, whose current research focuses on security and rule of law in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq. He is also a non-resident fellow at Tabat Lab, a think tank and advisory firm based in Islamabad, and regularly travels throughout Pakistan. Adam's analysis has been featured in the Washington Post, Guardian, Foreign Policy, War on the Rocks, Lawfare, and the National Interest. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. I have to say that I don't feel qualified to be on this panel with the other people, the other esteemed guests who have much more seniority and knowledge than I do. But because Ambassador Durrani asked me, I said yes. There are, other people who are more expert than me on the nuclear issue and the Kashmir issue, but I'm going to speak to what I think I can speak to, which is the fallout of this in terms of the U.S. perceptions of the conflict and global perceptions of the conflict. And I'll just share a few observations and then leave more time for Q&A or discussion, which I think is usually more interesting anyway. First, the elites in both India and Pakistan have claimed this as a victory. Objectively, and I'm not just saying this because of my hosts, I think in many ways, in a very narrow short-term sense, this was a win for Pakistan, because India's performance was a bit embarrassing for them, and I think I'm not sure what they got out of it, because now they have I think they are viewed as somewhat irresponsible in terms of how they handled this conflict. And the far right elements within India are upset about the restraint that they did show. So they're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place there. And by many accounts, they lost 3 to 6 jets. Those figures can be disputed, but I think there's strong evidence that they definitely lost some aircraft. So that's of course embarrassing for them. And I think at the end of the day, Pakistan was viewed as the party that showed more restraint. And if you look at analysts in at least outside of India, there's a consensus that it's unclear whether this was a homegrown attack or not, but there's indications that it was a homegrown attack based on the location. And of course, it's not too hard to imagine how India's policies in Indian administered Kashmir might lead to a homegrown terrorist attack. It's not difficult to imagine why that might be. Of course, India has the benefit of uh, long established narratives and history, and Pakistan has sponsored terrorism in the past. That's just a fact. And because of incidents like that, and the history, it's very easy for India to say, well, look, this attack must be state sponsored. It's not homegrown. But I think, if that were the case, you would have seen stronger statements from India's close partners, because they would have presumably been shown evidence that it was a state-sponsored attack. But you saw very lukewarm statements. If you read the statements that emerged from the US, the UK, other governments after that terrible terrorist attack, which I think we have to remember was a terrible terrorist attack, and the people who were killed in that attack are victims, regardless of who conducted it. And I don't think we should forget that. But if you look at the statements that came out of other governments, they were very, very specific in their wording. They said, "We stand with India against terrorism." They didn't say we stand with India against state-sponsored terrorism. They didn't say we stand with India against Pakistan. They didn't say that India has a right to protect its sovereignty and so forth. If you look at most of the statements, it was very narrow. We stand with India against terrorism, which of course India experienced a terrorist attack. So that's an easy statement to make. I'd like to remind people in Pakistan, though, that just when it comes to these narratives that emerge about Kashmir, and sorry for any background noise, but Pakistan is at a severe disadvantage. And the example I give is I forget the name of the movie, but there's the movie about the attack on the hotel in Mumbai, and you can play that movie. I've watched that movie on international airline routes. When I get on an airline like Qatar Airways or Emirates, sometimes that movie's available. And just a couple of years ago, I watched it on a flight. The global perception of India and Pakistan is still far more favorable to India on this issue than it is to Pakistan. And some of that is self-inflicted by Pakistan. The average Westerner, and actually the average global citizen, even from the global South, is far, far more likely to have visited India than to have visited Pakistan. And that's largely due to choices that Pakistan has made. And so there's just not as much exposure to Pakistan, and there's not as much exposure to the Pakistani narrative. And of course, India has a large diaspora in the United States that has been very organized in support for India, whereas the Pakistani diaspora in the United States is largely aligned with PTI. And I'm not criticizing that, but because the Pakistani diaspora in the United States is involved in the domestic politics, the domestic political battle inside Pakistan, the kind of advocacy they do is not so much focused on foreign policy as it's focused on how they view political events within Pakistan should be treated by the US government. And I don't think I have to explain that further to people on this panel. So Pakistan has two, or I'd say three major disadvantages when it comes to the war of narratives. One is the history and how the history has been documented in popular media over the last several decades. The second is the fact that there's just not much exposure to Pakistan globally. And the third is that the Indians have the advantage of a very organized diaspora. Now, I say that, but I also think it's important to remember that for whatever reason, Kashmir and the conflict there is largely viewed as a sideshow in terms of the priorities of other countries. And you saw that attitude when J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, made the statement that this is none of our business. And that was a statement he said as the recent conflict was ongoing. He said it's none of our business. I actually think it probably wasn't positive to make that kind of statement because I think that kind of statement can actually contribute to the escalatory cycle by sending perhaps the wrong message to India that it's free to escalate and sending the wrong message to Pakistan that, you know, we don't care if this escalates. And my criticism of that statement would be that it's irresponsible, but I do think it reflects a widely held view, at least in the Trump administration. Now, of course, when the National Command Authority was summoned, and all of a sudden there was a nuclear coded element to this conflict more so than before, then that's when you saw President Trump and Secretary Rubio begin to frantically make calls and try to find a solution to this. And I'm sure the same was true for regional countries and even China. One advantage that Pakistan does have, I think, in terms of the narratives that have emerged from this is that I believe Pakistani diplomats are more accustomed to defending Pakistan and defending criticism of Pakistan than Indian officials are. And I was watching some of Hina Khar's statements on international media, and I think she did quite a good job at making Pakistan's case. I didn't agree with every point, but I think she was doing Pakistan quite a service there. Whereas if you look at the statements of Indian officials and certainly of the Indian policy community that's not part of government, but that is part of the think tank community and the journalism community, I mean, they're simply not very good at taking criticism. And so they often respond in a very aggressive way that I actually don't think communicates their position very well, except to say that most people aren't paying attention to this to begin with. I mean, you look at shows like Piers Morgan shows. I mean, those clips were being circulated by Indians and Pakistanis. They weren't necessarily influencing the opinions of the wider audiences of the UK or the US or any other country. That doesn't matter so much because the decisions on how to approach this issue in the UK and the US and other governments are high-level decisions that are made by elites. It's not a grassroots issue. It's not an issue that has a lot of popularity among ordinary citizens or currency among ordinary citizens. So I do think, in some sense, perhaps the silver lining of this is that it's a wake-up call that you can't just let this issue completely fester. There is a danger in escalation. India isn't necessarily always going to behave in a responsible way. We can't take that for granted. But, I would say at the end of the day, this is a loss for both India and Pakistan because this conflict and these episodes keep South Asia in a completely dysfunctional status quo that prevents trade, that prevents economic growth, that prevents people-to-people ties. And in some ways, Pakistan has more to lose than that from India, simply due to its size. I do agree with the statement from General Wali that India and Pakistan are rehyphenated in a way that perhaps is advantageous to Pakistan and certainly irks India. India hates being hyphenated with Pakistan. India hates being discussed in a way as if it's equal to Pakistan. And so I think that's, from Pakistan's the perspective of Pakistan's government elites, perhaps that's a positive thing. But at the end of the day, I think this episode and the fallout from it is a net loss for the region. It's a net loss for the world. And we can spend time deciding how blame should be assigned, but I think we have to remember that it's really not something to be celebrated in the long term, even if some Pakistani narratives emerged triumphant. So I suppose with that, I'll stop speaking, and maybe we can talk more during the Q&A.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful discourse. Next, I would like to invite Ambassador Asif Durrani. Ambassador Asif Durrani is a senior research fellow at IPRI. He was a career diplomat and journalist and has served as Pakistan's permanent representative to Afghanistan, apart from being ambassador to Iran and the UAE. Thank you, sir, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hadia. Thank you, Adam, for joining IPRI's webinar. In fact, I thought that you are the best person because you have much better perspective of the region, especially with regard to Pakistan, Afghanistan. Of course, India, you have not done it, but from security perspective, as you have a keen eye on that, so your inputs would be valuable. And I'm glad that you could participate, and your insights are valuable. No doubt you have raised some...
Sir, may I request a little louder, please?
Yeah.
A little louder, please.
I try. I hope.
This is okay. This is okay.
All right. So thanks, Adam, for your valuable perspective you have shared with us, and it is going to be helpful in looking at the things from the scholastic perspective. What I can share, and Dr. Janjua has already given the details of the event, but from my own judgment, if you look at the entire episode, and I think India will have to go back to the drawing board as far as India-Pakistan relationship is concerned. Because on one hand, they boasted that they have made Pakistan irrelevant. But on the other, they launched an attack to do what? Can they punish Pakistan for that? Or they think that those terrorists, they were sent by Pakistan. Had this been so, Pakistan would not have offered neutral investigations. I can tell you, I can say it with confidence that it was a big gamble by Pakistan offering neutral investigations, because it could have gone either way, but it has not. And which is why that Pakistan's narrative was accepted by the world community, which is why, as you have rightly pointed out, that there were lukewarm reaction from many of the countries, especially important countries like United States and the West. And another aspect which we have to look into it is that the support which Pakistan got, fine, it is Turkey, it is Azerbaijan, but at the same time, India, even in the neighborhood, it could not muster the support of the neighbors. What to talk of elsewhere? Of course, it's because of its size, it is now the darling of the West, especially. It has a strategic partnership with the United States. But at the same time, what they forgot was that if they thought that they can dictate the agenda and then they can be the policemen of South Asia, so I'm afraid we are not going to accept that. And then we are not going to accept India's role as a judge, a jury, and an executioner. This is not going to be accepted in any way. And then I think for that, Pakistan does not. Pakistan is not alone in demanding a neutral inquiry. But the dangerous aspect of this entire drama was that India has now re-injected new normal. First, it tried in Balakot in 2019, but it failed. And this time now they have in fact raised the severity, and then they were a notch up, and they used missiles, they used drones, and of course the aircraft thing, the airspace was dominated by Pakistan, but because we cannot keep our, we have to keep our powder dry, we can't be complacent, and that is the reason. But for us, another dangerous aspect is the Indus Water Treaty, which India has threatened to hold in abeyance. But at the same time, they are also hurling threats that they will stop Pakistan's water. Now, that is something very, very serious. And that I think international community must take note of and uh, counsel India that this kind of an approach is not going to promote peace between India and Pakistan, and it may have very grave consequences, which I'm sure, and there are commentaries about that also. And more importantly, India has always tried to keep the Kashmir dispute under the wraps. They loathe discussing this issue, but what to talk of this Pulwama, this Pahalgam incident actually internationalized the Kashmir dispute. It is a blanket which would not leave India, and we are not going to spare India on that because we are a stakeholder, we are a party to the dispute, and we just can't leave it like that. And the kind of repression, just imagine that the Pahalgam incident takes place, and immediately over 2,000 Kashmiris are arrested. And the houses of those alleged terrorists who they have not proven yet that they were involved in so-called terrorism, their houses were destroyed. Now, what kind of this bizarre approach is going on, and then India also claims to be is a candidate to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Isn't it bizarre? Isn't it ridiculous that a country which does not give respect to the UN resolutions, which does not implement UN resolutions, is trying to be the custodian of world security and wants to join the UN Security Council? So these are the issues which we have to look into, and in future, because right now we can talk about ceasefire, but it's a ceasefire, and there's no permanency. At least this is my personal view. This ceasefire can be disturbed anytime, and then probably that would be more serious, because what I can say personally is the Indians may be trying to consolidate their position. They may have gone back to the drawing board, and perhaps they want to come back with a vengeance. If that is the case, then I think then there will be much more serious implications. And for that, it is important that the international community, especially those with whom Pakistan and India have had close relationship and they are still enjoying close relationship, they should enter the scene. Kashmir dispute has to be resolved, whether India likes it or not, because every now and then it crops up. And now the Indian pretext that it is terrorism, in fact, it has become an excuse in the hands of Indians. And don't forget that this is just not Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed. In the neighborhood, don't forget about ISKP, which has been operative, which has been operating in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in Iran, Tajikistan, and
Sir, you
Moscow.
have 2 minutes left.
Fine, Moscow. So if they can have an outreach to those countries India cannot be insulated. And I'm afraid, this is again my personal view, that tomorrow perhaps ISKP, in order to bring Pakistan and India close to the brink, may enact a terrorist act. What Indians are going to do that? So therefore, there's a need to have a cooperative strategy between Pakistan and India in order to address this scourge of terrorism. Terrorism has no friends. So Pakistan is the victim. Ever since this war on terror, we have lost 80,000 Pakistanis, both civilians and armed forces personnel. We have lost, almost close to $160 billion in opportunity costs. So we are the victims. But India, if they think that they can pressurize Pakistan in this manner, in the military realm, then there'll be a equal match. There will be but on an economic front, yes, we are hard pressed. But this could be temporary, because I remember vividly when I was doing my course in SOAS, Brazil had an inflation rate of 1,500% in 96, 97. But where is Brazil today? So I think that we will overcome. But India must be counseled that if they want to promote the hate agenda, then it's not going to help. So I'll stop here, and then we can chip in on as far as the question answer is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to open the floor for question and answers. Please keep your questions brief. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and you can go ahead. For the time being, I think there's a question in the chat box from Sir Khalid Chandio, and his question is to Adam. Sir, he's asking, how do you see Modi's statement of so-called new normal in the region where two nuclear states exist and share the longest border?
Well, if you listen to his whole speech, I mean, it is troubling, because what he's essentially saying is that, he's saying a statement that sounds reasonable on its face, which is that terrorists won't be distinguished from their sponsors. But, in reality, of course, what that means is that any attack, whether it's an indigenous attack, whether it's an ISKP attack, as Ambassador Durrani, I think, rightfully warned about, is going to be treated as an excuse for escalating things along, not only along the LOC, but even inside Pakistan. So deep inside Pakistan is what I mean by that. So I think it's disturbing, and I think it reflects what Ambassador Durrani said, which is that this is a ceasefire. It could fall apart. It could fall apart very easily. It hasn't held very long. I do agree that the Indians are probably going back to the drawing board. I also don't think that the international community is going to take the lead here. So it's really going to be on India and Pakistan whether they want to find a way to have some kind of trust building and address this dysfunction. It's unclear whether India's in the mood to do that, or even Pakistan for that matter. But I think it's a dangerous statement.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Adam, if I have a question with you, because you are very deeply involved as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And now there are reports that India and Afghanistan, they recently, in fact, yesterday, Foreign Minister Jaishankar spoke to Muttaqi. And Indian media is saying that he thanked Afghanistan for supporting India's point of view. I'll take it with a pinch of salt, but I don't know how that was, because the Indians are quite fond of churning out stories of their liking, or so you may have seen that how Indian media behaved during these 4 days of match between India and Pakistan. So, but even then, if say Muttaqi has said it, you think how you will see India, Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship then in future?
I think the Indian-Afghanistan relationship these days is, from India's perspective, about I think at some level there is a genuine, concern for terrorism, but then the bigger incentive, of course, is just to poke and prod at Pakistan and try to isolate Pakistan and I think they sort of revel in the fact that they have good relations with the Taliban. And from the Taliban's perspective, I think the Taliban are happy to meet with anyone who will meet them. So they're not going to turn away India. And actually, what's interesting about about Afghanistan's approach to India and the Taliban's, again, they have lukewarm messaging when it comes to Kashmir, which is that people portrayed the Afghan Taliban as these hardline Islamists who have these unmovable principles and aren't able to operate from a position of realpolitik. But that's simply not true. They're Islamists, but they're also Afghan nationalists. I mean, I think that's what's since 2021, I think we've seen that the Taliban are as nationalistic Afghans as any other Afghan group, and that's how they determine their positions. And so from their perspective, it would make sense to try to have a positive relationship with India. And of course, the Afghan Taliban have their own reasons to try to irk Pakistan and try to flaunt that relationship in Pakistan's face. Because let's face it, the Pakistan-Afghan relationship has not been, the Pakistan-Taliban relationship since 2021 has not been the most functional one.
Thank you.
Mr. Adam, my question is regarding Indus Water Treaty. How West is viewing it? It's an ecological issue. It's a humanitarian issue. There has not been much of rebuttal or much of protest by international community about holding this time-tested treaty in abeyance. What are your views and how is it viewed in the West?
How it's viewed at the country desks in the foreign ministries and State Department, I'm sure, is that they're disturbed at the unraveling of at least that status quo, which was that was supposed to be intact, and the fact that I think India is using it as a bartering chip. I mean, it's not going to have effects yet, but it will have effects down the line. In terms of the broader public, I don't think they know it exists. And in terms of the Trump administration, I think they're completely distracted by other things, as you can see. So I wouldn't expect very strong statements about that. That's something that's going to be handled by technocrats behind the scenes, I would suspect, if it's handled at all.
So, yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I mean, I have a question for some of the panelists if they're willing to answer it, which is that what do you think the tactical lessons learned for the Pakistani military has been from this last episode? What was done right and what was done wrong, and how will Pakistan's strategy adjust if something like this happens in the future?
Right. So I'll try and answer your question. Well, there are tactical lessons galore, and the first and foremost is the need for investing in capabilities. Those are dependent and those are network centric. This is the network centric age, and the data links, the capabilities like airborne early warning system, beyond visual range radars, and a very secure satellite comms, and a common operating picture which is data linked. So the high tech capabilities and the cyber capability that has come up as something very, very critical, because a new normal was introduced in the shape of loitering munitions. We kept hearing during the academic discourses about loitering munitions, drones, but we for the first time witnessed in our populated cities. The loitering drones, Arup, it came all the way to our capital city and it was ready to deliver its payload. The need to counter such weaponry through the technological means. And then this was a skirmish which remained confined to the air forces and their standoff weaponry and precise effects of those weapons. But the next time, I think we need to look at our mechanized component and its state of readiness. And I know this is the age of combined arm warfare, and no single arm on ground or amongst the tri-service can win the battle itself. So greater tri-service integration, communications, resilience and robustness, and the resilience of our critical infrastructure in communication domain at the country level. Our critical nodes like airports, our air and our power facilities. Now, Pakistan employed cyber attacks against the critical power grid of India, and it was quite crippling. So I think in future, the capabilities which need to be invested in are the cyber defenses, data communication, networks, beyond visual range, missiles, and the greater resilience and greater protection, I think, needs to be invested in, because the future battlefield would be lethal, precise, and transparent. There will be very little in the presence of satellites to be concealed. Everything that would be seen would be hit. Everything that would be hit would be hit with a lethal hit and would be destroyed. So the need for dispersal, need for protection, robust communications, mechanized forces which are capable of operating in such battlefield, because we expect the way international community has uh, you know involved itself. We have to fend for ourselves in a short stage of, maybe this time it was 72. In next iteration, it might go on to more than 72 hours. For that period, our mechanized component needs to hold its own. And in the presence of lethal weaponry like missiles, like drones, there is a need to be more robust, more linked, and especially our mechanized components need active defenses. So this was purely in tactical domain, but coming a stage up, I think there needs to be a better arrangement amongst the two nuclear states of the communications, because if you start trading the missiles, anything on an escalation rung can go wrong. If we take one step up the escalatory ladder, who knows that what is misconstrued, and under this whole din and confusion of war. So we need to do a better job of having robust communications between the two countries to prevent that kind of eventuality.
Yeah, I think your last point about the communications is crucial. I think that's a very important point. I have another of my own questions. I know there's questions in the chat, but I'll answer one question if it's okay with the panel, the one about rehyphenation, and then I have a question for the more esteemed panelists that if I can ask a follow-up. Somebody asked, what is my take on the rehyphenation in South Asia? You know, there's a rehyphenation in the sense that President Trump made a statement about potentially mediating the Kashmir conflict, and of course, India hates those kinds of statements because it treats India and Pakistan as equals, and India doesn't like that idea. Of course, I mean it's obvious to everyone here. In terms of the rehyphenation, I mean, I think Pakistan has its own issues that it needs to focus on. And I think the hyphenation of Pakistan with other countries has never been positive for Pakistan. I think Pakistan has so much potential, and hyphenation doesn't serve that. India and Pakistan should be hyphenated only in the sense that they share cultural history and people-to-people ties, and there should be a future in which Pakistan and India are robust trading partners, because that would be good for both countries. But I don't think the hyphenation is necessarily a good thing. I'd also remind folks that Pakistan's not part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and things that occur along the LAC or the LOC are not part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. It might have some sort of tangential relation to the Indo-Pacific strategy insofar as we're seeing how the performance of Chinese aircraft, how those aircraft perform in battle, but and that's something the world is watching. But Pakistan simply isn't part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So the United States and India have this whole other dimension to their relationship. In fact, in some ways, I actually think the tone of U.S.-Pakistan relations right now are more positive than the tone of U.S.-India relations in some ways, except that for the fact that the U.S. and India have this larger strategic relationship right now that's part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. I guess the other question I have for folks on this panel, though, how do you view the visit of the UK Foreign Secretary at this time? Is this something that was just pre-scheduled and they decided to just go ahead with it, or do you assign more meaning to it than that?
Ambassador Durrani, please.
You say UK's foreign secretary?
UK Foreign Secretary.
Where?
To Pakistan. David Lamy.
Well, I'm sorry, I was so busy I couldn't look at this. Maybe Dr. Janjua can, if you know about it, but a visit itself was long pending, and I think this episode which happened between India and Pakistan may have, in fact, preponed his visit to come early. But it was, as far as his visit was concerned, it was already slated, it was already scheduled. But yes, definitely, I think with the Pakistan-UK relationship are very important, and we have been consulting each other whenever there were issues. We owe it to UK for granting GSP Plus status in EU when they were members of the EU, and I was Deputy High Commissioner in London. So it is there, but I think, and then UK has the longest history, institutional history of India and Pakistan. So I think I can see that from that perspective. But whether the UK would take sides, I don't think so at the moment. But on terrorism issue, we have a very close cooperation at a foreign office to foreign office level, and we do exchange our views. And then more than that, there's a de-radicalization program, which with the help of the UK, we launched in Pakistan some decades and a half ago, and that was successfully launched. And it had a positive impact also. So but as far as his now coming is concerned, I'm sure that is a institution to institution. We have this relationship, and I'm sure this should have a positive impact. Yes.
Well, thank you. This brings us to the end of our time, and this was a very fruitful discussion. I would like to thank Mr. Adam Weinstein, Ambassador Durrani, and Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua for joining us in this session and giving us your insights into this very important topic. I would like to thank all of our audience as well for joining.